Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodanandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Bonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are continuing Canto 10, Chapter 48, and there's one text, text 22. So we can chant together. Dehadi upadher anirupitatvad Bhavo nashaksana bidal manahasyat Ato nabandas tava naiva mokshaha Syatam nukamas tvayi no vivekaha Dehadi upadir anirupitadvad Bhavo najaksana bidatmanahasyat Ato nabandastava naiva mokshaha Syatam nukamas tvayi no vivekaha Please chant. Dehadi upadir anirupitatvat Bhavo nashaksana bidatmanahasyat Ato nabandastava naiva moksha Syatam nukamas tvayi no viveka Dehadi upadir anirupitadvat Shabo nashaksana bidatmanaha syat Ato nabandastava naiva moksha Syatam nukamas tvayi no viveka The word for word. Deha, of the body. Adi, and so on. Upadha, as material designative coverings. Anirupit tatvat, because of not being determined. Bhavaha, birth. Na, not. Shaksat, literal. Na, nor. Bida, duality. Atmana, or the Supreme Soul. Syat, exists. Ata, therefore. Na, no. Banda, bondage. Tava, your. Na eva, nor in fact. Moksha, liberation. Syatam, if they occur. Nikama, by your sweet will. Tvayi, concerning you. Na, our. Aviveka, erroneous discrimination. So the translation for text 22 is as follows by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Since it has never been demonstrated that you are covered by material bodily designations, it must be concluded that for you there is neither birth in a literal sense nor any duality. Therefore, you never undergo bondage or liberation. And if you appear to, it is only because of your desire that we see you in that way, or simply because of our lack of discrimination. In the purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, here Akrura states two reasons why the Lord appears to be covered by a material form, or to take birth like a human being. First, when Lord Krishna executes his pastimes, his loving devotee thinks of him as their beloved child, friend, lover, and so on. In the ecstasy of this loving reciprocation, they do not think of Krishna as God. For example, because of the extraordinary love for him, Mother Yasoda worries that Krishna will be injured in the forest. That she feels this way is the desire of the Lord, which is here indicated by the word nikama. The second reason the Lord may appear material is indicated by the word aviveka. Simply because of ignorance, a lack of discrimination, one may misunderstand the position of the personality of Godhead. In the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, Lord Krishna's discussion with Sri Uddhava, the Lord elaborately discusses his transcendental position beyond bondage and liberation. As stated in Vedic literature, Deha Dehi Vibhago Yam Neshvare Vajyate. There is never a distinction of body and soul for the Supreme Lord. In other words, Sri Krishna's body is eternal, spiritual, omniscient, and the reservoir of all pleasure. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Sha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Sha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapsa Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavan Ishvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Panchakalpa Tarubhya Shakripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presaya Bhutale Shrimata Romapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll just read the translation once again for refreshing. This is Akura talking. Since it has never been demonstrated that you are covered by material bodily designations, it must be concluded that for you there is neither birth in a literal sense nor any duality. Therefore, you never undergo bondage or liberation. And if you appear to, it is only because of your desire that we see you in that way, or simply because of our lack of discrimination. So going to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, he notes that there's a dialogue that's actually happening between Krishna and Akura. So he has Krishna asking the question. So this is Krishna speaking, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, getting into the sort of inner communication happening between Krishna and Akrura. So Krishna is asking the question, if there's no ignorance in me, then where does this body of mine, a product of ignorance, come from? So it's a very leading question, a leading philosophical question. And it's an interesting question posed by Krishna, as per Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in terms of this inner dialogue that's going on between Krishna and Akrura. Yes, maybe I need to move it closer. I'm so sorry. There, that's better. Thank you. Thank you. It's fine. It's fine. I think, well, if you can't hear me, then we can raise the volume. I think I just had it a little bit too much to the side. Now, it's an interesting question posed by Krishna, as per Srila Vishwanath, because it implies that there has to be the proper perception of the body. So that proper perception of the body is communicated by Lord Krishna to Arjuna. So this is Bhagavad Gita 13:30. And here's Krishna. One who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created by material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. So that's verse 13:30, the Sanskrit. Prakritaiva chakarmani kriyamanani sarvashaha ya pasyati tatamanam akartaram sa pasyati. So one has to have a certain vision when one's looking at the body. So this is the developed transcendental vision of a living entity, that one sees the body, that it's separate from the body's activities. The understanding is that the body is made of material nature under the direction of Supersoul. So the Supersoul, the representation of the Supreme Lord, is always with the individual soul, but doesn't take part in bodily activities. So dwelling within is the Supersoul, and that Supersoul is the permitter, the overseer, and the supreme enjoyer of all the activities performed by the individual, and dwelling within his body and utilizing his body to perform those activities. This then means that one is forced to do activities according to one's bodily constitution. So the Supersoul, which is sanctioning the individual soul's desiring material enjoyment. So that's what the Supersoul, why the Supersoul is called permitter. So the individual soul within is looking for enjoyment, happiness, and the Supersoul dwelling within the body alongside the individual soul is permitting this kind of pursuit of activities on the part of the individual soul. And according to how the body is made up, its constitution, it's already inclined towards certain activities. It's already structured in a particular way to allow for certain activities, both on the subtle and on the gross level. So from Bhagavad Gita 11:23, this is Krishna saying, yet in this body there is another, a transcendental enjoyer, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as Super Soul. So Krishna tells us of this fact that it's not just the individual soul that's present within the body, but also the actual owner of the body, the supreme owner, supreme proprietor, who's present there, and he's the one who's overseeing the activities and permitting those activities. So Akura responds to Lord Krishna's question, because remember, Krishna had asked the question, how is it that he has this particular body, and this body that comes from ignorance, meaning that it's a material body. He wants to know, where does it come from? So Akura gives a response to Lord Krishna, because I've described that, what the body is, made of material nature, and the fact that there's a spiritual being within that body, and there's also the supreme spiritual being alongside the individual being in the body. So Krishna's question had been, where's that body coming from? So Akura gives a response to Lord Krishna's question regarding the existence of the body. And he refers to the body as a product of ignorance. That's Krishna's term. The ignorance being this very gross composition, the earth, water, fire, element, ether components. It's got a very gross composition. And there's some gross desires that the body has, because it's looking for something to gratify its body. And there's a forced functioning due to the way the body is composed. That's the understanding. So it's not that, two bodies that are standing there, that they're identical. Each particular body is designed in a particular way, both physically and on the subtle level in terms of mentality, that has it already inclined towards certain actions. So, sometimes one sees something like, the other morning I was walking early to the temple, and coming right up towards me was a huge hulking man, like very dark mood as well. And so the body is designed in a particular way, and the mentality is of a particular way, and one can see that it's sort of inclined towards a certain kind of more ignorant functioning, that even though there's that huge body and that darkness indicates that there's a sense of helplessness. One can read it. So there's a forced functioning. As I looked a little bit closer, I see the man's pants are a little bit torn at the bottom. So there's a forced functioning. Despite that huge body, which might indicate that there would be like great strength, the mentality being more ignorant means that it wasn't being used that way. It was forced to function in a sort of more apathetic way. So Akura, he clarifies his response according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and he says, and this is him addressing Krishna directly, your body is not designated as coming from ignorance. So by those who know the scriptures, that's Akura's response. So he knows that Lord Krishna's body isn't composed of these material elements. He knows that Krishna's body isn't such that it's already designed that it has to function in a particular way, that one almost has very little control over, what is natural functioning for the particular body one has. So he continues, Akura responds to Krishna, therefore you have no birth. And in the verse we were reading Bhava no, so no birth. Or material existence like the living entities. So he's immediately making a distinction that Krishna's body is not actually one that's composed of gross material elements, which would be what would classify it as an ignorant body. So one can pause and consider, what are these scriptural statements that Akura is referencing, so to speak, when he's responding to Krishna's question? And in particular, he echoes a statement made by Krishna that touches on this mistaken idea that his form is material. So this is that statement made by Krishna. And he's actually putting a big category of persons who think like this. He says in Bhagavad Gita 9:11, fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. So in fact, it's a very common mistake, thinking that Krishna's body is a body of ignorance, which is how he's presenting himself to Akura. Where does this body of ignorance come from? But here he says that generally, when he descends in the human form, persons don't know his transcendental nature. And that particular verse 9:11 is Avajananti ma mudha manusim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshvaram. So the implication is that the human form that Krishna appears to have, it belies the fact that he's in fact the original supreme personality of Godhead. And Lord Brahma confirms this. This is how Lord Brahma puts it. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, as the supreme Godhead, he has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin. And he's the prime cause of all causes. So really putting an emphasis on Krishna actually being the source of everything, and in fact even the cause of everything. So Lord Brahma had been praying for creative energy because he had the task to put together the different elements and the different beings. And after Lord Brahma's many prayers for creative energy, Krishna responds to Lord Brahma and he says to him, although I am not easily knowable by the conditioned souls, you have known me today because you know that my personality is not constituted of anything material, and specifically not of the 5 gross and 3 subtle elements. So there in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 9, Krishna is specifically stating it. So it's like drawing it out. He actually says it directly. My body's not constituted of anything material, and specifically not of the 5 gross and 3 subtle elements. So that's earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and mind, intelligence, and false ego. Says that's not the composition of his body. So he's agreeing with Lord Brahma that he has an eternal spiritual body, and he's actually stating it clearly what he's not. So if one were to say that because material existence is realized as forms, and that's how one generally sees material existence. One looks around, one sees something shaped as a bench, one sees something shaped as a table, one sees something shaped as a computer. You recognize material objects according to their form. Um, then one could think, well, the opposite of material, something spiritual, it must be that it doesn't have a form. One could think that. And sometimes persons that are coming for the first, second, third time to the temple, they actually have this idea. So they won't look at the deities, because the idea is that something spiritual doesn't have a form. So you could say that if somebody holds that kind of concept of spiritual, it's just a negative of material. They're thinking, oh, if it's material has form, then spiritual can't have form. And Srila Prabhupada states, the real spiritual conception is that spiritual form is not material form. So very simple. You don't extrapolate it to the extreme. The real spiritual conception is that spiritual form is not material form. That's all. You can only go that far. And so Brahma's appreciating the eternal form of the Lord and the personality of Godhead came to approve of Brahma's concept of spiritual form, because Brahma stated it directly. You have an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. So eternal, blissful, the origin of all. So it was Lord Krishna approving Brahma's statement by actually emphasizing that indeed he doesn't have his body's not made of material elements on the gross or the subtle level. And Akura continues in his response to Lord Krishna's question, asking where his body comes from. So this is Akura, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur commenting, and Akura is talking to Krishna. If your body appears to be material, it is only an appearance of birth, like the living entities, since you are actually independent. So you add something new. So there's an echo of Krishna actually in this statement by Akura. And this is Krishna's statement, and I'm drawing from Bhagavad Gita 7:12. Krishna says this of himself: know that all states of being, be they of goodness, passion, or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I am in one sense everything, but I'm independent. I'm not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. So Akura's been highly knowledgeable. He's stating that it only appears that Krishna is taking birth like regular living entities, but he's actually completely independent. And then Krishna, if one thinks a little bit, he himself says it of himself: I am everything, but I'm independent. I'm not under the control of the way material nature functions or has living entities function, that some are functioning more in goodness, some are functioning more passionately, being very active, or some are functioning in ignorance, being very helpless. So Lord Krishna is not subject to these different ways of being that's governed by material nature. It's not that he has that body already composed in a particular way on the subtle and gross level, that he's going to be forced to function either in a kind of happy state, a very active state, or a very helpless state. Not at all. In fact, he says that all these ways of being, they're within him, but he's independent. So Lord Krishna is not subject to the different ways of being through goodness, passion, or ignorance, because those are actually emanating from him. He's actually allowing for that to be the way material nature functions. So his appearance of birth is described in this way, since that has been touched on. So this is coming from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada writing. So here's a description, and it's what Vasudev saw when Krishna took birth, so to speak. Vasudev saw that wonderful child born as a baby with 4 hands, holding conch shell, disc, club, and lotus flower, decorated with the mark of Srivatsa, wearing the jeweled necklace of Kaustuba stone, dressed in yellow silk, appearing dazzling like a bright darkish cloud, wearing helmet bedecked with the Vaidurya stone, valuable bracelets, earrings, and similar other ornaments all over his body, and beautified by the abundance of hair on his head. Due to the extraordinary features of the child, Vasudev was struck with wonder. So this is how Lord Krishna took birth, so to speak. He appeared fully dressed, fully ornamented, with a full head of hair and a helmet. So a general being taking birth certainly doesn't appear fully dressed and fully jeweled and not with a helmet. So Vasudev could therefore understand that it was Krishna who'd now appeared. And he became overpowered by the occasion. So he understood the enormity of the presence of Lord Krishna. So Vasudev, he was very humbly wondering that although he himself was an ordinary living entity, and he was conditioned by material nature, at least that's the way he saw himself. I've got a gross body, so therefore I'm forced to behave in a certain way. He was even externally imprisoned by King Kamsa. That was his situation. So despite all of that, the all-pervading personality of Godhead Vishnu or Krishna has appeared as a child in my home, exactly in his original position. He was completely amazed. Overpowered is the word that was used. So the prayer that Vasudev offers to this newborn child, Lord Krishna, and I'm reading this just to emphasize Akura's statement that he says that Krishna doesn't take birth in the regular way. Vasudev prays to Lord Krishna, and he says, "My dear Lord, I can understand who you are. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the super soul of all living entities and the absolute truth. You have appeared in your own eternal form, which is directly perceived by us. I understand that because I'm afraid of Kamsa, you've appeared just to deliver me from that fear. You do not belong to this material world. You're the same person who brings about the cosmic manifestation simply by glancing over the material nature." So Vasudev was quite clear about Krishna's position. And of course, I'm reading this to highlight the nature of Krishna's birth, since that was the question that he was asking about his body of Akura. So his explanation, meaning Vasudev's explanation, may be connected to Akura's continued explanation of why Krishna's body is not born of matter. So this is Akura still talking to Lord Krishna. As you do not have a material body born of ignorance, you do not take birth from a father's semen like an ordinary living entity. Rather, your birth is just your divine appearance. So Akura spells it out, highlighting the difference between a regular human birth and Lord Krishna's so-called birth being his divine appearance, by saying that there wasn't the seminal component in Krishna's appearance or birth. So Akura, he concludes. This is Akura talking. "For you, there's no difference between body and soul. So this is the natural conclusion after highlighting the nature of Krishna's birth. He's now coming to this point. There's no difference between body and soul for you, he's saying to Krishna. Your body is you, as proved by the statement. And he quotes from Laghu Bhagavatamrita 15342. This is from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. Akura says, your body is you, as proved by the statement, Deha Dehi Vibhagoyam Neshvare Vidyate Kvachit, meaning there's no distinction between the body and soul of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at any time. So that's, of course, can be contrasted with an actual human entity where there is, you can draw a distinction, like right in the beginning I mentioned, there's the body, and then dwelling within the body is the spiritual being, the soul. So you make a distinction, the external gross covering, and then the spiritual being within, composed of bliss, eternity, and knowledge. But in the case of Krishna, his body is himself. There's no distinction between body and soul. It's a spiritual being. So the composition of that body is not mind, intelligence, ego. It's knowledge, eternity, and blissfulness. And Srila Prabhupada gives an explanation of the interplay that happens between body and soul, in which he says that without the living entity, meaning that soul, a material body cannot automatically take shape. So it doesn't automatically take a shape. It requires that spiritual being within. So if a material object shows development, so we see a baby, like I remember during the COVID time, there was a gap between seeing like all the children I'd been dealing with, and then seeing them 2 years later, everybody was a head taller. So, and their arms were longer and their legs were longer. So, so showing that kind of development, one can understand that there's a spiritual soul within, because the material body cannot develop without the existence of the spiritual being within. And in the case of, so that is that was Srila Prabhupada's speaking about that interplay between body and soul, where you can actually understand that the seeing development indicates the presence of the soul. So in the case of Lord Krishna, Devaki, his mother, describes this way. So she's observing this four-handed form that has appeared, and she says, your forms, addressing the child, your forms are eternal and all-pervading. They are also self-effulgent, changeless, and uncontaminated by the material qualities. Such eternal forms are ever cognizant, full of bliss. They are situated in transcendental goodness and are always engaged in different pastimes. You are not limited to a particular form only. All such transcendental forms are self-sufficient. I can understand you are the Supreme Lord Vishnu. So I thought that this particular statement by Devaki was so extraordinary that it completely hits upon this point of that Krishna doesn't have an ignorant body, or body coming from ignorance just of material composition, that she actually covers everything. His form was always exist, even before the cosmic manifestation. The form is eternal. It's all-pervading, meaning, as super soul, he actually is present in all living beings. It's effulgent, it's self-effulgent. It's changeless, so always existing. It's not touched by material qualities. And your form is fully cognizant, so fully conscious. And it's situated in transcendental goodness, so not touched by material qualities that, a person is sort of happy in the state of happiness because they're functioning with goodness, but rather Krishna's body is in transcendental goodness. And he's always engaged in some pastime. And he's not even limited to the one form. In fact, sometime after this description, she actually makes a request of Lord Krishna. She's actually very afraid of Kamsa. Can he show his normal human form? Can he just show a human form? And indeed, in an instant, Krishna turns into a two-handed, human-looking like baby. So he is certainly not limited to a particular form. So she actually contrasts this form of Krishna to human forms, and she says, all the conditioned souls are continually fleeing from one body to another and one planet to another, yet they do not get free from the onslaught of birth and death. So limited to the particular material body, trying to flee out of it, landing in another material body, and even going from planet to planet, but still remaining with under the control of material nature, meaning they're again landing up in bodies that have a certain composition that's going to force them to behave in a certain way according to the composition on the gross and on the subtle level. So these are some thoughts that came from this verse and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary. So if there's any thought related to this topic or some sort of question that emerges.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you for your class and delving so deeply into the subject matter. I guess I could say once again, whenever I hear talk of Krishna, I think of this statement that Prabhupada made, Srimad Bhagavatam 10:8-15. I was like, I had to find it. How I always refer to this because it's it's about the only thing that helps me to kind of get it. Where it says the etymology of the name Krishna. If we analyze the nirukti or semantic derivation of the word Krishna, we find that Na signifies that he stops the repetition of birth and death, and that Krish means satartha, or existence. Krishna is the whole of existence. Also, Krish means attraction, and Na means ananda and bliss. So the part where Prabhupada says, Krishna is the whole of existence. So, and then in the Brahma Samrita. Is this it? Yeah. Brahma Samrita 5:1 says, Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. And he is the origin of all. He has no other origin, and he is the prime cause of all causes. So in my consciousness, it seems like, the all-pervading cognizant, right? And then the how in the Brahma Samhita it says he's existing inside and the whole. So how to really process these conversations? It's like Krishna's joking around, and he's making a joke almost. It seems like when he says this material, when he talks about, it's like he's constantly poking fun at his devotees. But even the concept of he, after hearing this from Prabhupada, is kind of like it's deeper than English language. Those Sanskrit concepts cannot be. It's almost impossible to show the truth and the concepts of the Sanskrit through English language. So it's kind of hard to convey it without studying, Prabhupada's books.
And also the realized experience of the devotees that is actually put into words is quite wonderful, that you get some sense of that all-pervading cause of all causes. You get some sense of the enormity. Yeah. So, and I think that's what you were emphasizing through reading that quote, also the text 1 of Brahma Samhita, and defining the meaning of Krishna.
What to me was so fun about Krishna is you can get your clothes out the dryer and have lint on your socks, and just say lint on my socks, right? Like, Krishna, what? Why is this? You caused this, didn't you? I'm saying it's like funny, it's always something funny. Like it can be so huge, but so simple, like, lint on your clothing, It's like, Krishna, you caused this,
Well,
it's
yeah, I mean, one of his characteristics, nectar of devotion, is that he's very clever. So hence he knows how to elicit a lot of thinking. And I think that's comes across from, that inner conversation that Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is highlighting, that took place between Akrura and Krishna, where Krishna indeed does begin with what sounds very humorous. And where does this body of ignorance come from? He's asking of himself. So of course it leads to Akrura having to really go into it. So yeah, very clever. So if there's no other thought or comment. Subhakrit had something.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Nice quotes from Bhagavad Gita, transcendental body of the Lord. Vaishnava means a devotee of Vishnu. Vaishnava. He is very compassionate for all living entities who are suffering in this material world, and he tries to deliver them from this. So his body also is spiritual body, right? He has a spiritual body.
Your question is, does the Vaishnava have a spiritual body because of his actions being such that he wants to deliver all other living entities? That's your question? Or you just looking for reinforcement?
No, generally Vaishnava, who is a Vaishnava? Vaishnava means who is a devotee of Vishnu.
Yes.
Who is very compassionate for the fallen souls, and he tries to give the message of Krishna, like that. So here, generally when we have a very exalted devotee, their bodies become spiritualized, transcendental, because they are constant in touch with the Lord, like that. They have a spiritual body.
Yes,
like
from that point of view. Of course, Vaishnava can refer to those that are engaged in service to the Supreme Lord, which of course would imply the desire to familiarize other living entities with the Supreme Lord. And one may be on a level where still one is actually under the pushing of the material composition of one's body on the subtle and the gross level. One may still be subject to the pushing of material nature. So in which case one's body may not be, fully spiritualized, because there's also gradations and levels of purification. So the broad definition of Vaishnava, certainly that you gave, of the compassionate being who is engaged, who's using his body made of material nature that's coming from ignorance, but he's using it for a divine purpose. That utilizing the body in that way could indicate that he's engaging in spiritual activity, so that's spiritualizing on the subtle level and on the gross level the body. But because there's a need to escape the bondage of the body, the bondage on the subtle and the gross level. Purification has to come, meaning that there's greater absorption in the spiritual. So in that ongoing process, one, as a Vaishnava, going through the motions and attempting to deepen one's relationship with Krishna, and hence spiritualizing one's body and one's consciousness, one may still be subject to how the body is composed on the gross and subtle level, and hence may be subjected to the pushing of the mind in particular, and that's dealt with very extensively. So one may still be subject to that. So the mind hasn't yet dissolved. It's only when the mind dissolves that you can say, yes, the body has become spiritualized. But one may still be subjected to the pushing of the mind. It has to finally dissolve. So then one can say, yes, the body has become fully spiritualized. But yes, persons that, very advanced personalities, yes, the definition then would be absolutely, as you say, the body's completely spiritualized. There's no doubt about it. I mean, when one's in the presence of a highly elevated personality, as you say, engaged in bringing this consciousness of Krishna to others, one is automatically extremely humbled because one understands one's in the presence of an elevated spiritual being. So yes, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's hard to put it into words, because it's like when you think of Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, even Bivla Mangala Thakur, all these great devotees and the Leelas and the Nityasiddha progenitors. It's hard to really, like, even when Prabhupada was in the beginning, hardly anyone could really know what an exalted person he was. He could barely make a devotee. He made one devotee in India, because people, they didn't see. So sometimes I think, of course could be wrong, I think sometimes it's the Leela avatars are the part of the Leela, which the Lord covers the person with the Yoga Maya to make them seem that they have these different things, part of the Leela. That's the thought, anyway.
Oh, that's a nice contribution. Thank you, Vaishnava Sivananda. Yes. the persons who are viewing the transcendental personality, they're under the control of material nature. So it actually requires the mercy of the transcendental personality for them to be able to see the spiritual being. Yeah. So indeed, so it's not so much that the personality changes in any way, the transcendental personality, but rather that it requires the mercy of the transcendental personality for one to be able to see.
A good example of that is Srila Prabhupada, where who would say he had a spiritual body? Who could tell? But one person who could really have an example of it was, I heard a story of one of his female disciples was walking behind Prabhupada in the snow, and she couldn't see any footprints. And so that's how deep it is that the transcendental body and the transcendentalist, or the pure devotee of the Lord, or the Leela avatars, they're going to be hidden so no one sees them. Else they'd be like, oh, look at him, he's a Leela. So that's how great God is. If he wants to hide something, he is not going to have a problem hiding it, because he's God.
I mean, it's even like Srila Prabhupada, the material body is giving in, but he's using his voice, his whole being, and he's still translating. And this is like when the body's, the soul is supposedly separating from the body. He did not stop in his activity. So, yeah, not subject to how the body would function were it under the control of material nature. The regular person is sort of very conscious of their pain, or very conscious of their misery. Transcendental personality in that condition of, obviously is a lot of physical suffering, but continuing in a calm way, translating still and giving purports. Extraordinary. Well, thank you very much for the kind contributions to the class. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.